a beast all in itself, because you can't just have dialogue that people call, I've heard it called the talking head syndrome, where people just, he said, she said, blah, 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 blah. People have to be doing things. Because yes, I might be talking to you and we might just be sitting staring at each other having a cup of coffee, and that's the extent of our actual conversation. But in a book, that's really boring. So you need to have descriptions of what the people are doing, their facial expressions, while they're having this conversation to keep your reader more caught up in the story.
And personally, I think dialogue defines the character so much, the way they talk.
Absolutely.
And people don't think about that. Because, I mean, we're in the melting pot here. I mean, there's so many different ways to speak. And you want your character, if they're a bad boy character, then you don't want them to be all, prim and proper all the time. It's going to confuse the reader and it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Also, make sure your language fits your target audience. If you're writing for middle school, don't be going all Mortal Kombat, please, with your descriptive details. You're going to get parents at your door picketing. I work in a middle school, I should know. So I have to balance everything, violence, sexual content. Basically, Dan can go.
You got 2 out of 3. You got violence and sexual content.
Oh,
now all you need is profanity.
I can't have that in mine.
You're in middle school. You live in this environment.
I do. I actually was with hippies and too young. Too young. But being a young adult author and an adult author, there's differences right there. Like, Dan's character could go pick up the chick, to say, hey, baby, you want to go to the hotel? Yeah, sure, okay.
Read my story.
I did read your story. That's good. My characters are teenagers. I mean, if I want anything beyond a makeout scene, I got to be very, the chemistry of the characters, my company, their ages, my school district that watched me like Big Brother. They do. All kinds of stuff. And my publisher, she's my age, she's 25, and I did a makeout scene, and she flipped out and said, kids don't make out in high school.
Does anybody actually remember high school?
Yeah.
And I said, honey, what kind of school did you go to?
Mormon.
Catholic?
Yeah, Catholic school, public.
Oh, Catholic, come on. I went to Catholic school. I was sweet and innocent. Every guy I went to Bible college. Every guy I grew up with dated girls from Catholic schools and then married Protestant girls. There's a reason.
So the 2 basic points for word usage is, again, make sure you know your target audience. If you're not sure how a lot of authors talk to that target age, read other books. Like, I'm a big fan of the Percy Jackson series for intermediate, but that series, that series usually wouldn't transcend well to adults because they're like, oh, fantasy stuff. A lot of adults don't usually want to deal with high fantasy like Percy Jackson. And of course, make sure enough to get them excited and start the imagination, because we're cosplayers. We love imagination, right? We got a lot of it. We don't want to smack them in the head with an image. Let them fill in the holes and kind of create their own story with your story away.
I got a question.
Yeah.
What kind of research goes into making the series? Like Percy Jackson has a lot of Greek mythology.
It does. He was actually a professor of mythologies, and his little boy who had ADHD, and if you read Percy Jackson, all demigods have ADHD because they're one of the battle all the time. His son was feeling discouraged that he had that, so he made up the adventures of Percy Jackson when his son was 7, and he started storytelling at his son's bedside for years, and finally his son goes, Dad, you should write this down for other kids. And he's like, okay, I'll try it. I'm just a professor in mythology, but I'll try it. Look how huge Percy Jackson is.
Made a terrible.
You not read the endings of those books? Oh, yeah, sure. I just finished House of Hades.
Oh,
Yeah, I just finished it a few days ago. But yeah, again, like Dan said, it starts with just verbally telling a story. And that's all I have on word usage. And when we move on to point 5, which I believe is climax. Climax.
I'm a guy. I'm impatient to get to that part.
I got some points.
Somebody actually raised their hand back there.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Somebody else had a question?
On the dialogue, in an actual conversation in real life, we have nonverbal cues, we have the ability to modulate our voices and everything else. How do you get tone worked into your dialogue? So, for example, you can tell sarcasm or something like that with your characters, because just the words on the page, if you let them lay flat, they don't have any of those verbal clues.
I think your right into that.
Yes.
Describing facial expression, definitely.
Yeah,
That's-
facial expressions, the movements, it's just being descriptive of what, like I was saying, of what they're doing. If you just say he said or she said, you don't get those
Yeah, I don't
cues.
like the page with
So-
just pure dialogue.
And it's,
Yeah,
you
it's
know, a lot of
hard.
people will say don't use adverbs, which
I'm guilty of that. I
Yeah.
use a lot of adverbs.
I mean, to an extent, yes, that's right, but sometimes you need to use it to describe exactly what the character is saying. Like, you know, I love you, she shouted, is differently as opposed to I love you, she said softly. So, you know, it's totally
Yeah.
different meanings. You know, one is like she's bursting with this excitement, the other is she's kind of scared of the response. And so I think things like that help to show the facial cues, and you can say, you know, if the person gesticulates a lot and uses hand movements and describing that.
Script,
Action verbs,
Descriptive language.
italics, capitals, and every editor and publisher is going to have different views on how to do this. Some hate adverbs. I had an editor that crossed off every adverb, but when you do that, you've lost a layer of richness and tone that sometimes that's necessary.
Can I
Yeah,
Can I
please.
comment on that? My publisher, I used too many adverbs, and I didn't know it at the time. She highlighted all of them in orange. I felt like I was in a jail. There was so much orange on my script, or not my script, excuse me, my manuscript. So my goal was I had to get rid of 1/3 of them by the end of my process. And I think I got rid of 45% of them. No, go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's okay, but you realize you just answered going by 1/3 and then 45%. Your editor would have said something about that. Consistent, 33%, 45%.
She was happier though. You want to make her happy.
You want to make the editor
Yes,
happy.
we
It's
do.
kind of like your wife. If the boss is happy.
Yes.
Yes.
One thing that I noticed is like, you can describe the same thing differently and change exactly what you mean by it. Like, you can have a character who's like, you know, scared but putting on a brave face anyway, versus if you word it as the character was putting on a brave face but you could tell they were scared. That gives a different
Right.
feel to
Words
what
have
you're
tremendous
doing.
power, and storytelling is almost a burden because how you express it, you don't want to come off like you're just showing off your vocabulary or a dictionary. How you express it has one goal, and that's conveying your idea, your imagery to the audience. So even what order you put them in, putting on a brave face and carrying on, or carrying on, putting on a brave face, are two different things, because the first appears more hesitant. I'm putting on a brave face and I'm jacking myself up to go do this, versus I'm going and putting on a brave face while I do it. And so there is a complete difference. And that's why you have editors and work on things, and why you put, I was pointing at my adverb guy, he's gone.
Oh.
Yes, ma'am.
A really good example of using the character's actions to express literary example of Ernest Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants. You never get to the character's head, but you know exactly what's going on because the character looks at the table or whatever, it's well done. And it just shows what you're trying to talk about, where it's not so much telling us, but showing us.
Yeah, I would put Hemingway up in the, this
Yeah.
is a real author guy who knows how to tell his stories. Kind of like Robert Frost with poetry. And
Along with her, if you're going to be a writer, you better be reading. But William
Yes.
Faulkner, As I Lay Dying, every chapter is different character. It's from a different character's point of view. His or her dialect is different. It's one of the most amazing